avant tout là. Et sur ces pointes de fuite, c'était là que se faisait et se créait la vie. Or, c'est en même temps là que la ligne de fuite risque de tourner en ligne de mort. Et puis...
L'Université libre de Liverpool, abécédaire, on commence avec Belonging et Brit.
Okay, so B is the letter, which is how your name begins, and we've decided to think about belonging. So I'd like you to tell me, what do you understand with this term and how do you relate to it?
Yeah. Belonging. I've thought about belonging for a long time, and to be honest, I'm probably at a point where I'm slightly sick of the term belonging and of the whole thought around belonging. You know, it's such a big, massive thing that we sort of fetishize nearly, I think, belonging. And I know that people start belonging in English has that whole be long, so to long. I've been thinking, when I start thinking about it, I thought, you know, the whole longing to be, and it's a sort of it's a nearly unfulfilled, like longing is such an unfulfilled thing. You know, you're constantly sort of longing for something that you're not reaching. And then I thought about in German the word, what would be the word for belonging, and it's dazugehören, which is quite interesting because gehören, so hören is what is hearing and is to listen to, but we use it if you're owned by someone or you own something as gehört dir, so it listens to you, mostly to you, and but dazugehören means that you're well, how I see it is basically you're listening to, like dazu means as part of, so you're part of a whole thing that you're particularly listening to, which I actually like. I was like, oh, okay, so actually maybe it is about, you know, that thing about listening to one particular group in a very particular way, or listening more to that group, rather than thinking of it as like that group has power over you, because I think that, do you know what I mean, like the need to belong to something sometimes makes people do all kinds of really quite sad things, I think, and I think of myself and think like, oh my god, you know, this like need to belong somewhere, so you that longing makes you want to act in ways sometimes that are not necessarily very healthy, or they're not, you know, so I think of us as both as foreigners, where we try to sort of like nearly cripple ourselves in order to belong, because we have that longing to be part of something. But I wonder if I could turn it around and think about like I'm particularly listening to that place.
I just wanted to add to that, because in a sense, with how you now unpack the word, as in longing and be, so in a sense it's almost like there is something there already that exists that you supposedly have to belong to. But in that sense, what we are losing is this sense of agency, because you're kind of fitting into the structure rather than kind of creating your own structure, creating your own thing. So on a more kind of a practical level, do you think you have found the ways of belonging as a foreigner in this community, be it in the Free University of Liverpool, or in, you know, let's say community where you live, or in the artistic community, wherever you feel you belong?
I think it's a process of constantly trying and constantly sort of stepping those boundaries of going, I have now clearly gone beyond that agent, like I've clearly given power away. Like I've clearly lost myself.
Okay,
I've clearly
okay.
been a chameleon and sort of tried to hide in a way that I fit, which can be very pleasing. It can be a very pleasing experience, but I think unless I'm aware of it, it takes a lot of power away from me. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Because I sometimes feel like I'm not aware of, I'm just doing that to please, or I'm doing that because it makes my life so much easier if I,
Yeah.
you know, just sound kind of like them, or I behave kind of like them. But actually, that belonging thing, like if I don't, I sometimes think like if I don't make other people, like if I don't change, so if it becomes about becoming, which I now find much more interesting than belonging, then if it's only me who's becoming while I'm trying to belong, you know, something is missing. So what's about the other people? What's about, like, you know, the other people in the Free Uni, or my English boyfriend, or like if they don't also listen, if they don't also in that process in some way become a little bit German,
Right.
for example, or a little bit whatever it is that makes me different, clearly different. So I don't know. I feel that I belong more in the sense that in order to belong, I think you have to have an active engagement. You have to have an active listening. You have to sort of really. So I guess in that sense I belong much more because I'm actually actively engaging. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I wonder if there is too much pressure put on belonging, because I feel there is definitely pressure in belonging to something.
To something, you see? It's that thing of like, do you have to belong to something, or do we just long to just be?
Be,
And then you just are. And then so are the other people. And then comes in that what I think about my German weird etymology that I just did, that has to do with like, so all it means is that you're being and listening. You're listening to, particularly listening to those people around you in an active way.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that you have to agree, because I think this like belonging to
absolutely.
sometimes it's like I have to somehow agree with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And be like you rather than just be.
Be, longing to be. I know, longing to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Wow.
L'Université libre de Liverpool, abécédaire, avec Benjamin Phillips. La lettre est B et le mot est brother.
Okay, fantastic. Ben, we have B for brother for you. When I was thinking of asking you a question for this, I thought about lots of different ways in which brother could be important, and I don't want to steal your space in terms of you answering on the word brother, but I wanted to ask you if I'm your brother.
Wow. I think you are my brother, Gary, and I think that fills me with a lot of love, and the word that you are my brother link feels as though we've created a very strong link there, and I feel quite overwhelmed emotionally by your generous offer. That I might be your brother. I was thinking about this brother, and with the introduction you've given me, about the idea of rain and raindrops, and how water holds together against the atmosphere in a drop, and the idea of a brother is the idea of you and I being joined together, and that there is a sense of us being more than ourselves. But of course it raises a huge paradox about the idea of what's outside of our of our own raindrop in which you and I exist as brothers. And I guess when it's raining, there are all the other raindrops and all those other potential brothers and brotherhoods. So we have this incredibly powerful union between you and I, which is an act of creation. But of course all this other raining is going on at the same time. So I think to try to come towards an idea of brotherhood, perhaps we need to stand underneath the rain and bear in mind that rain happens over a period of time, then it stops and it rains again, and it's never the same rain twice, and it's recycled and moving through. And I think about the idea of our desire, a desire, like my desire to have in you to find my brother, and everybody's, and this powerful, and the power of that wish to have a band of brothers, like the Three Musketeers, who act out of the power of their desires and their will to live. And they're held up as three brothers who will always support each other against the evil that's surrounding them. But I guess in order for us to think about brotherhood in a wider term, we have to find a way to encompass the evil within that sense of who we are. Because as human beings, and we tend to imprison life by our very nature. So how do we break life out of that prison, yet still have this desire and wish for this connection and this brotherhood? And I guess I'm using this rather poor metaphor of the rain, because there's something about water and overflowing and something that's in constant flux. And how do we at the same time grasp hold of the idea of being brothers, but at the same time allow that brotherhood to be affected by changes, temporal changes, and it to be a constantly flowing thing? I think that's a great problem, if not a concept.
What would characterise a brotherhood for you in that sense, in an everyday sense? What might it mean in I don't know, in March? What would brotherhood look like in March or September or whatever? What would it mean?
I guess there's the idea of the shared experience and the sharing of, and I think a lot to do with a proximity to somebody, as though through that brother you're able to expand yourself and vice versa, and then with that person you're in a state where you can constantly readjust and redefine who you both are, while still taking some benefit from the idea of this outer shell that's protecting that relationship. So for coming back to you and I, for example, now in March, I guess our brotherhood is about us seeing and trying to understand the complexity and the infiniteness that is the other one, and to take. But I think there's a physicality in that understanding, which comes back to an idea of touch, and how do we reach out to each other and touch each other with our thoughts.
Are there for you, because there are for me, any issues around brothering when there are sisterings around as well, that there are more or less open or closed to brothering? I can put that really literally if you want, but I thought I'd keep it in the abstract.
I mean, I think that's the deadly attraction of the framework of the brotherhood, is that there's an exclusivity there, and this is about a constant becoming of contact. So in this moment, we're becoming in a moment of contact, but at the same time there are a million other points of contact that are going on. So our understanding of brother-sisterhood is about an understanding that all those millions of points of contact are happening simultaneously. And I guess your thought is very helpful in terms of thinking about this point of contact is just one point of a million points of contact, and that what our brotherhood is this vessel that is me to everybody else and back again, and the impossibility of trying to understand the multiplicity that's going on there while still having something, the intimacy of multiplicity perhaps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
L'Université libre de Liverpool, l'ABC de l'ami, c'est ça, Chris, avec le C for class.
So I was thinking that class boils down, for me and probably a lot of people, to very a very personal issue. So I was thinking about an experience I had pretty much at the beginning of my first time at university, and I was in London. It was my first experience of pret-a-manger, and I was with a friend, and I picked up a sandwich with avocado in it, and I said to my friend, "What is this? What is this green stuff?" And she said, not quite haughtily, but not haughtily, "Have you never had avocado before?" And so I thought, it's one of those moments in the life of somebody who's working class, or has been brought up working class, where you rub up against what you could call, the relative privation of experience, which sounds a bit pretentious, but it's the phrase that came up with next door. And I think it's got something to do with the fact that through life, as someone who's working class, you realise that your childhood wasn't as full, or couldn't have been as full as someone who is from the middle class, and obviously the upper class more so, because of the question of economics and access to facilities and opportunities, and that never really ends, to be honest. It's akin to the coming out process of someone who's gay. It keeps happening. So the relative privation of experiences is something I hold to quite a lot, and it's still happening now. Although as I get older, I've accumulated my own experience that, if I was middle class, I might have not had to do that. So kind of class fixates on things and objects, and the avocado being one. The other things are the contrast between the rigid class system in Britain being working class would be soap opera, middle class and upwards would be opera, and so forth. Holiday camp versus, camping in France, these kind of things. And nowadays, it's all become blurred because, you know, we have this new class called the Chav class, and that tends to be, because the working class has dissolved somewhat, because working class people have gone to university since, you know, the new Labour years, and have entered into professions that their ancestors weren't ever able to. It's as if Britain has had to create a new class or condemn a certain subclass, and that's what the Chav is all about. And yeah, living on council estates and welfare tends to define what a Chav is all about, and a kind of lack of values, which is not my judgment, but is the judgment cast upon them.
Is it possible for people to change?
Yeah, it is possible for people to change, but you see, I suppose, like, having been to university 3 times and got a PhD, I feel like I'm somehow lifted out of my working class roots because, you know, I don't necessarily talk like the rest of my family. My cultural references aren't the same as the rest of my family. Even some of my, you know, political values aren't the same, although I'm kind of on the left the same as my dad, and I think that is the legacy of my dad's, you know, my family's broad political identity being on the left. But this is another thing about class, and that has to do with a sense that it's a position of nostalgia, or somehow working class doesn't necessarily exist anymore. Chav class does. People, even within the working class, rebel against that designation, which seems an implied slight against working class people.
Where do you see multiculturalism within the class system?
Well, I think multiculturalism blurs the class system, or in fact unites people along the axis of economics, of opportunities. I think there's I don't know whether Guy Standing, I think he's an economist, came up with the idea of the precariat, a class of people, not so much social, but although it develops into a social class, I suppose, at some stage, of people who are low-waged and don't have the kind of working conditions that protect their ability to sustain life for them and their family. That's the precariat. And, you know, multiculturalism is relevant there because that works across the board because of globalization. And can extend into people who are middle class, people who have been to university who are historically of the middle class, who then are absorbed into the class of the precariat, who can't find stable forms of employment and can't guarantee the basic material conditions of life that their parents were able to guarantee. And I think there's some resentment there, as if, you know, even within the middle class, and certainly within the working class, well, maybe not in the working class, more in the middle class, that, you know, the generation today who are going to university today and leaving and entering into the precariat are paying for their parents' you know, relative affluence.
So just to finish up, to be provocative, how useful is the class system in the world today? You know, you talked a lot about how it's changed, and there's been this dissolution of the working class and to some degree the middle class, or there's the boundaries being blurred. The precariat, whilst is maybe a more accurate way of describing it in conceptual language, doesn't necessarily sort of transfer over into sort of how people identify.
No, and I think the identification is very much about how you feel inside, and that links to how your family kind of lived and behaved with each other, and what stories people told each other in their youth, in their family setting.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris.
Merci beaucoup.
L'Université libre de Liverpool, c'est le ABC de l'ami. Ça, c'est Grace Harrison avec le jeu for Grace.
Hello, Grace. You're in an unusual position of being given the word that is actually your name rather than just beginning with your name. But yeah, I don't know. Tell me what does Grace mean for you?
It's a complicated word with a very long history. Used many times in the Bible, the Old Testament. This I find quite interesting. I think originally it is coming from Homer. It is written in Charis, which is rejoice. But then in the Bible they are using it very much for oppressive ideas, that God has grace as a favor which he chooses to bestow on you. But the way that it is written in the Bible, it is as if it is something given from God to the undeserving. So it is not, although in Titus he's talking about that the grace of God hath appeared, bringing salvation to all of men, but at the same time it is not all of men, because then everybody would not have to go to church and feel like sinner, and grace is not a given thing. It is you have to be obedient, and you have to be granted this grace, which I find is a very interesting concept.
Does that for you relate to, in some way, to your identity of yourself as Grace, or is the name a sort of quite disembodied symbol that exists, as you, that's not involved with that historical perspective?
Well, I've always liked the word grace because it's a virtue name, and but it is not as crass, maybe as joy or hope. I enjoy the ambiguity of the word. So maybe I like the mixed concept of grace being something that is situated directly alongside a wrath of God.
Mm-hmm.
Grace and wrath are the two aspects which you can receive depending on your behavior. I don't know if I think of myself as very wrathful, but I enjoy this duality, and maybe for me personally, I always like to be somewhere on the fence, somewhere where you can choose to go one way or the other, but it is not fully clear from the beginning. So maybe I have internalized certain aspects of this idea of grace, but maybe not to the biblical extreme.
Do you think that grace has a particularly human or religious, like you're saying, it comes from God, but there's also a kind of a a human way in which it's used as a description. It's less, you know, a graceful stone. It doesn't seem to fit. Is it a particularly? Is it a concept rooted in the human?
Well, it is interesting because for me there is also a disconnect between this idea of favor and God and that the afterlife or eternal life is created by grace, God's grace, and so this I don't quite know how to reconcile with the idea of elegance, beauty, of form, or type of movement. I'm not sure about this connection. That you will have to work for God's grace. And if God's grace is then translated into beauty, maybe it communicates why we privilege beauty so much.
Mm-hmm.
We have to constantly strive to be beautiful enough to be in God's grace.
And by inference, to be ugly is to be feeling God's wrath, perhaps.
Possibly. I mean, there are many people that you would think from the way that they privilege beauty that they do genuinely think that someone who is not so beautiful has done something wrong and God is punishing them or something like this. Maybe the belief, which could be mixed with some belief of previous lives and reincarnation, but then this is not Catholicism, so I don't know. But it is an interesting transition.
Okay, that's 7 minutes. That is up. Unless
is there more that you feel that you would like to gracefully interject?
I think that for me, grace is a soul thrilling concept, which must be deeply appreciated, but never misunderstood.
Thank you very much.
C'était de libre. Deuxième prise. Greatness avec Gary Anderson.
So, Gary, your name starts with a G, and we have chosen a word for you that starts with a G, and the word is greatness. And I've sort of noticed over the last couple of weeks that word fills you with dread to a certain extent, and I guess maybe we can just start by you just letting me know or talking about what greatness actually means for you.
Thanks, Bri. I was hoping you'd go on a bit longer, just to use up the time, but I can see that you've come to a close. Yeah, it does fill me with dread. I think the whole exercise fills me with dread, but I'm torn because I think it's a really good thing to listen to everyone else. It's just that me sitting here and doing it just fills me with dread. It's horrible, and especially with a word like greatness, which is so cruel, because I've got nothing to do with greatness. I think of the word greatness, my mind's blank. I've nothing, absolutely nothing to say or think about it, except a few cliches about who might be great, or what someone might be able to do in order to be thought of as great, or what greatness is in terms of the size of something, which is not a quality of superiority, but a size of a quality of size. So running around my head trying to think of like interesting things to say. I'll have to I don't know, play it safe and say that I have nothing interesting to say except that this situation that I'm in now is awful.
Would you I'm quite interested in the question of size. You see, and many people do automatically sort of equate greatness with size. Do you want to elaborate just a little bit more on why you think that is? Like, why do people think of like size? Is it physical size? Is it the size of people's brains who are great, or the over of work that they make when they are great?
I think, yeah, that's a really intelligent question. I think the relationship between greatness and size is one that you know, goes on and is perpetuated in the lives that we live, just due to lazy thinking, isn't it really? Because if we think, like, for example, this morning, or I think it was last night, Hugo Chavez died.
Yeah.
And he's now going to be thought of as the great, and he's physically quite large.
The second greatest socialist after.
Yeah, that's what I like. Yeah, totally. And I think that so he's quite large physically, but he's also great in the sense that he's anti-imperialist, and that he took a lead role in how or imagining alternative methods of the wealth of oil being distributed through Venezuela and then trying to spread through South America and stuff like that. And so you could say, well, he's great because he's fought against great powers or something. But so size and stuff tends to fill us with I don't know, tends to trigger something lazy, something cliched, something that can't quite live on its own if you think about it clearly.
And does it have to do with awe? Is it something awe-inspiring?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think again, like all the things you could line up for what greatness would be. You could, you know, one of those words would be awe.
Do you think that, or would you think that greatness is in any way particularly related to a patriarchal kind of thinking?
Yeah, definitely.
And do you think that
Don't
that's...
you?
Yeah, I do. Is that why it... Could we go beyond all of that? All of those cliches that are stuck to greatness?
Okay.
And can we find behind that anywhere something though where we can, or you can honestly have some sort of sense of greatness that you have met in people?
Okay. I think, and this again is a kind of cliche, but it runs a little bit contrary to the ordinary tip of the tongue cliches that come around with greatness. Great people, I think. Okay, first of all, we have to reject the word greatness because it's not. So the people who are really valuable, I think, are people who tend to have. People who tend to have energy and integrity and you know, have a focus on something, so they're working things through. You know, they see things completed, and they're open to other people, and you know, they're good at listening and all also good at speaking.
It's like greatness seems to inspire like one ditch of cliche after one ditch of cliche.
It's an absolute it's awful. You know, when Claire Farnett asked Deleuze letters, you know, she asked the interesting ones, like the history of philosophy, which is what's going on next door. Okay, tennis, but you know, Deleuze had something in him was sensitive to tennis.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, Deleuze's answer on tennis isn't the best of the lot, but you know, there was something.
But something in you is sensitive to greatness, or it wouldn't piss you off that much.
Okay, maybe, and that's sort of interesting. Okay, there's a sense in which my life is, in one sense, is focused on or planned towards becoming great. Now, I think we all have that in us somewhere, and it's it's deeper and darker in some people, and it's sort of quite palatable and reasonable in others. But there's no doubt that there's something disgusting about wanting to achieve greatness, because greatness can be in the sense that we all live to achieve a certain kind of greatness, that we're all working on particular projects in order to achieve greatness of some description, is to do with what other people think of you. And this is really destructive. I think it's really dangerous, because we can't communicate with each other properly anyway.
Yeah.
So why would we suddenly rely on somebody else's sort of opinion of, you know, what you've done, or someone else's value on what's going on? Do you know what I mean? It's a really I don't know, it's a quagmire of horror. I think it's awful.
And then how do you, like, because of course that's like the when you find it in yourself, or that desire to have that in yourself, how do you feel about, just as a last question because we're going to have to finish, about your relationship to someone who maybe you could, and now I'm putting words in your mouth, but like for example your relationship to Deleuze, who maybe you could think of as maybe not great, but I guess inspiring, or then also great. Like, how do you feel about that quality that you're describing in other people that might have inspired you?
I think broadly you could say that people who self-identify as great aren't. That's clear, because the struggle stopped. They're not questioning things that really need to be questioned. Blah blah blah. Deleuze is definitely one of those people who tends to be really self-conscious and a bit shy about his own achievements, great though they are in my view. But they're great because they have the quality of the continuous question, and the energy that comes with that question, and the integrity that comes with that question is I suppose, the attributes of greatness.
Thank you.
Université libre de Liverpool, après l'abécédaire de Gilles Deleuze. On arrive maintenant à l'interprétation de Louis. Et le sujet est laughter. Première prise.
So, Louis, you're quite renowned for your distinctive laughter. Can you tell us a little bit about what your relationship with laughter is in your life, or some of your thoughts on laughter?
Well, I suppose it comes from mainly my relationship with laughter. It comes from my dad, because he has a distinctive sense of humour, and I can't watch anything humorous without him in the room, and so if I'm on my own, it's I feel I'm missing something in my humour, because his laugh is very amusing. So I think also that it's very a social thing as well. Laughter, it's community driven. It's laughing on your own, watching a film or something, or a comedy show on your own. It doesn't have quite the impact for me anyway. It's and also, yeah, we just feed off each other when we laugh. But yeah, I would say I have a distinctive. I suppose it's also a nervous twitch as well. Laughter, it can be. So there's two sides to it.
What would you say is the role of laughter in your life?
Well, in my life, it's ubiquitously there. Yes. So it's something that's taken for granted almost. I think as much as eating and sleeping, I have to let it go at some point. Let a laugh out. Otherwise, I'll sort of lose my head almost. It can be. releases a lot of energy and sort of frustration in a positive way, I think. And I think every day it has to come out at some point, some emotion that's there, and laughter has a very good way of letting go of the subconscious. Yeah, it was Freud. Maybe I don't know much about Freud, but yeah, it's some Freudian slip, I suppose. It can be have a very dark meaning as well. After, I think maybe people laugh when there's not the worst point in their lives. It can be nothing else you can do but laugh. So it's something that's ubiquitous and almost it's always there. But
What can you tell us about the dark side of laughter that you're mentioning now?
well, yes, being British, we have a lot of Europeans or foreigners come to this country and say we have a dark sense of humour, which, yes, it depends on there's certain areas of Britain it's darker, but also our sort of that working class, is that very much everybody against the world in the sense of fighting against a big force, and if it's the government or something. So I've forgotten what was the question again.
I was asking you about the dark side of
Oh,
laughter,
yes.
and you were starting to talk about British humor particularly.
Yeah, it's the irony. I think some people are offended by it. We don't generally, British don't tend to mean it in a bad way, but the irony can be a bit awkward. It's and so but no, there's a darkness in all of us. We show it we tend to show it in a humorous way more often than maybe European or American. So, but I that's what I gauge from people. But it's a good social force. It says a lot about the way we live, and you have to be able to laugh at things.
You were talking about it almost as if it doesn't come out in laughter, it has nowhere else to go. So would you say that laughter can make a form for certain things that are going on, either for individual or in society, that has no other place?
Yeah, it's something that's it can be a very forceful thing, but I think it's sort of a bit of an appurtenance. It's something that's added on. I don't think it, in political stance or anything, it's not really there. It's something we do in our homes. It's something that's a social thing, but it's nothing important in a way that can change the world. I'm not sure, it's just a difficult question. I can't I see it.
Any kind of last thoughts on laughter, on your take on laughter?
Well, not really. I can't think of anything, but it's...
Thank you very much for your time. Free University of Liverpool, abécédaire dans le style de Deleuze. Maintenant on fait L pour leader avec Lorena.
So, just talk about leadership. And I was just thinking, who was leader in your house when you were growing up? What would be a leader in? Would you have a leader in domestic family or?
Yeah, I guess there was, yeah, definitely. You know, I was born into a patriarchal society, and my father was the definite leader, and a lot of my own, I guess, yeah, I think a lot of my thinking probably about leader and leadership is connected to that, you know, to that first relationship with my father, and I guess currently my feeling, you know, the first thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about leader and leadership is it's a strong rejection of it. It's like I don't want to be a leader, and I don't want anybody to lead me, and then, you know, and I guess, you know, thinking, you know, if I was to think about what my father meant in that role, you know, so what was the role he had as the leader of my life. Yeah, I definitely didn't want him to take a leader, the role of the leader, but he did. And you know, and a strong part of my development had been to try to understand that I don't want a leader and I don't need a leader. And yeah.
Is there a necessity for leadership, do you think, or does it just naturally happen? Say in our societies, it's something that's necessary for leadership, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the common belief, and I had many kind of heated conversations with people who believe in leadership and believe that, you know, yeah, it's all good for autonomy and the self-realization of people, but actually at the end you need somebody leading and you need somebody, you know, finding the way for others. And I disagree. I think that's bullshit. Actually, I think there is. I mean, I love figures. You know, there have been all these leading figures. I don't know, from Gandhi to whoever. You know, that I think about them and I'm thinking, oh, I feel warm about them, and I think, you know, and if I was to think, do I rather that they haven't existed or not? I feel conflicted, you know, because my sense is like, they represent, you know, they embodied some ideas that were very important, and they somehow managed to make visible those ideas, but then there is something in the figure of the leader that I think will always go against the best ideas and against any idea of real a real becoming of individuals. How can you follow somebody else to find your own way? Like, what does that mean? And also the problem, I think, being that people who think of leadership as something necessary, then to think that they need to create a space in which others, you know, in which they have to create a universe for others to exist in. They have to create the space for others to develop, rather than everybody has to find their own way. And even the people who is claiming, well, I will be a leader who will lead people to find their own way. I think there is, that's very paradoxical and that's kind of impossible. And I'm thinking, I had, beside my dad, I had other leaders in my life, and some of them were like great. They were really inspiring figures that had, But then again, my effort was to let go of them, to find my own way. And actually then thinking of the people who have really inspired me is people who are not leaders, just people who had found their own way of existing in the world. And that they had no desire whatsoever to lead others, and they didn't, and they actually resisted leading, even if people were asking them to do that, they would not do it.
I think that would be that was a good point to end on. Okay. Yeah. That's nice. A bit more. Well, I was thinking about religion and things like that. Certain religion has had a bigger impact in the past, and now it's more political. Is religion take? Do you think there's a leadership, and we sort of lost that a bit? As God was a biggest leader in the past, and now we don't really know who leads us politically anyway.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't. The notion of God, for me, it's like, if I was to say who where the power came from, my dad was almost from God, and I don't think we need a God. I don't think. No.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are at the Free University of Liverpool. We have Lena with L for love. So, Lena, another great thinker, Jacques Derrida, when asked about love as a question to talk about love, he said his head was empty, and then he could revert to nothing but cliches. Love for you, what is it? Do you have anything more than cliches for us?
I have a few thoughts on love. Let me start with our great thinkers, Deleuze and Guattari. And what they say is that we always make love with worlds. Now, that's an interesting concept, because what it presupposes is that the object of our love is not one, but many. Usually, in our Western philosophical tradition, we are thinking of the chosen one, of the romantic, platonic idea of love, and it's usually the one, this idea of the one who is there somewhere for us. However, we can also think of love as many. To make love is not to be united with one or to be united as two, but is to be together with many. Multitudes of the worlds that exist beyond our understanding. Now, how can we invite into ourselves love? What is it of the other person that we try to be together with that actually enters into our own self? We cannot assimilate, we should not assimilate the world of the other. We should try to multiply the worlds that we have and that the other has, and therefore expand on the notion of love. So with love, one should never totalize, and I think that is extremely important point. Now, in terms of this word love, it's completely inadequate as a term because it encompasses too many other sub-terms of love, such as you have, for example, platonic love, which can be aligned to friendship. You have romantic idea of love, which is quite problematic because it is this idea of the one, and I will go back to that. Then you have paternal or maternal love, parental love, which is yet another concept. So love as such covers too many things. And I will, for the time being, try to address the idea of romantic love and our notion that you are the one. Tatua masi. You are the one. You are the chosen one. You are the one that I choose. And that's an important point. Do I choose to be with you? Our great thinker Derrida, as you mentioned, says that love starts with a kind of seduction. You choose someone. There's an aspect of attraction, of seduction that happens at the beginning of love. What happens next is that love is disappointed, possibly, or that it flourishes. But there is the beginning, an expectation, something is happening, we have made a connection. It can happen for many reasons.
May I?
But yes.
No, after you.
Love and destiny. That's the issue there. Are you the one? Do you feel disappointed because you are not the one for someone? And this great expectation of being the one, of finding the one, which is also makes us full of disappointments. Have we been found? Have we found someone? Are you the one for me? The insistent question, the doubts that exist in your head. Are you with the one you were meant to be? And that's the problem with romantic love. Now, we have been taught for centuries to think about love in such terms. So it's quite difficult to reduce or to move our thinking away or our feelings from that idea of you're the one, of being the special one. But maybe it is possible to try to refigure love differently. Maybe through this idea of making love with worlds, with aspects of one person, rather than with one as he, she is, essentially. So.
Are you suggesting that that's the way we do love anyway, or that that's the way we should do love? Making love with worlds?
I think I shouldn't word the word essentially. I believe that we make love with worlds, but that we have been made to believe that we are making love with one, the unity of one, and that's where the problem starts. However, I also believe that there is something there in this idea of attraction, of seduction, that takes place between two people or few people, but I think it does take place between two people when they first connect, which allows them to enter each other's worlds. I also wanted to add this wonderful saying from my dear friend Tina, who said, "Never enough love." It was in Croatian. Nikad dosta ljubavi. Never enough love. And how love, when you think you had enough love, that I can't possibly fall in love with someone else. I can't possibly love another person, another child, suddenly love just surprises you. And there you are, in love with this person that you just didn't know existed before. Or there you are, just full of overbearing love for this new little human being that you've produced. So love is always kind of managing to reproduce itself. And I think that's a beautiful, surprising quality of love. Never enough love. It has a potential to grow in its own right, and you are its prisoner.
L'Université de Libre de Liverpool, abécédaire, c'est la lettre M, pour mess, avec Mary Pearson.
So what do we have to say about mess, Mary?
Mess is an interesting word because mess has inherently in it a judgment. So if someone says, my house is a mess, or I'm a mess, or clean your room, it's a terrible mess, well, even without the word terrible, mess implies that it should be another way, that it's become disorderly, it's out of order, and it should be reordered. A state of order should be created. But there are a lot of different kinds of mess. So some mess is just maintenance. You know, I've cooked dinner, the kitchen is a mess. This is a daily act. I've slept in the bed's a mess. I make the bed, I clean the kitchen. These kinds of mess are just for maintaining a certain level of order in daily life. But other kinds of mess are acts of rebellion. You know, if you have a party, you're perhaps in company with people eating rich food or drinking a lot of alcohol, behaving in other ways than what is everyday behavior. And then these kinds of mess are actually the evidence, not just of time passing, like if I spent the night in my bed or cooked dinner, but of little acts of rebellion. And within this kind of mess, I think that there is some more problematic mess, because it really depends on what the attitude is towards reinstating order. In the case of a party, it's not as though you want to erase that the act of rebellion happened. I mean, you have the party, and then you reinstate order and you go on with daily life. You don't want to deny the fact that the party has happened. But other kinds of mess, I think there's an inherent denial or unwillingness to want to face what the mess represents, because in those acts of rebellion, something has been revealed or something has become visible, which we would rather prefer wasn't visible. I've been thinking about teenagers in the sense of small acts of rebellion. I think teenagers are more willing to live in a continuous state of rebellion. So in that little scale, if you say, clean up your room, it's a mess, they'd rather not, because they maybe swing more towards the chaos side of the spectrum than the order side. But if you take that on a larger scale, for example, I lived in Switzerland for a number of years, and there was a very, I think, problematic relationship with mess, because each night there would be these kind of societal large-scale acts of debauchery. Yeah, so I worked in this bar called the Turnhalle, and you know, everybody was on their worst behavior. So they'd come, you know, at 7 o'clock there'd be a sort of artful vibe in the place, and people were meeting and socializing and having drinks. by 3 o'clock in the morning, it was ugly, and you were really seeing the underbelly of society. You were seeing people begging you for more alcohol when the bar was shutting, and really starting a fight with you if you had to cut them off and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more alcohol. All the cigarette ashtrays were overflowing with cigarette butts, with cigarette boxes. There would be broken glass everywhere. There would be, you'd see who had gone off with who, or weird things would start happening. And the interesting part about this kind of mess was that it had to be cleaned up every day in order for daily life, as the Swiss would like to maintain their self-representation. It would have to be as if it never happened.
Yeah.
And so when you'd be going home from the bar at 5 o'clock in the morning after you'd finished cleaning, you'd cross paths with the street cleaners who were sweeping all the broken glass and all the cigarette butts and all of last night's debauchery, so that the streets looked perfect the next morning as if it never happened. And we realized that if you said to them good morning, they'd be very friendly to you. If you said to them good night, because you were on your way to bed, they would not be friendly to you.
Yeah.
And this was the kind of mess that I think is not so much just about maintaining. I mean, of course, you can't go to work and allow, night after night's worth of debauchery to pile up. You can't then maintain a certain amount of order. But this kind of mess, for me, had a little bit of denial mixed into it. And I think that this is the same thing with Western civilization's relationship with garbage, for example.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, if you'll go traveling in third world countries.
L'université libre de Liverpool, abécédaire, avec Mary Pearson, le mot est mess et la lettre est M.
So you were talking a lot about mess outside body, and I was thinking about how people talk a lot about that they're in a mess rather than in mess. The contrast, like when you say you're in a mess, there's not much evidence of it, and yet you feel it quite strongly.
Well, again, I think that this is assuming that things should be in a state of order and that they aren't. You shouldn't get involved with me, I'm a mess. Implies that I should have my psychological state more ordered than it is. I don't know, cleaning up those messes, yeah, it's a kind of self-responsibility that you ought to clean that up. Or if you say she was messy, that internal mess came out where it shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And then you have to try and clean it up later on, erase it as if it didn't happen.
Yeah. So yeah, it is intriguing, that distinction. Although it comes back to kind of like psychological order as opposed to material order. Yeah.
I was talking about garbage when it stopped, and I just wanted to finish one thought, which is that this removal of garbage in Western society is making it not possible or not necessary for us to have the mess visible to us. So how much you consume and what kind of problems it creates, the plastics, the styrofoams, whatever, as long as they're bagged and removed, we don't have to confront what it is that we are doing. Yes, and I think this is where mess starts to get into a problematic territory.
Thank you, Mary.
Free University Liverpool, and it's Stephen and Lorena, and Stephen's word is sabotage.
Hi Steve,
Hi,
so
Lorena.
just before you asked me to not ask you questions, which in a sense I think is a form of sabotage of the interviewer. And I'm like, okay, so let's see
No,
that,
ask what you like.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
No, I'm just, it was just an introduction to think about what sabotage might be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, running with this, this is Stephen Benson and this is the 9 o'clock news. I'm going to try not to read from a script, but I can't really improvise, so I'll be glancing at it. When I was given this topic, my heart initially sank, and I even felt a bit cross. And I must make clear now, there's lots of lols and smiley faces in this, right? So I wasn't like really offended, but I was a tiny bit cross. I'm improvising now actually because I thought, well, this is what I thought. The meaning of words generally is to an extent, of course, subjective. This is like a bit vague. And to me, it felt like I'd been given the word. This is like paranoia on the first day. This all went after the first day, but just the first day, I had this paranoia. And because it was my first meeting, and I thought I'd been given the word deliberately. This is totally paranoid. Because I was seen as the openly gay anarchist saboteur, which I've been seen before in 2 groups I can think of, and even called the gay anarchist as a supposed joke. It wasn't very funny because I'm not an anarchist. Whose aim was to undermine the group from within, which is not my aim, and that's not a double bluff. So. And this is not total paranoia, though it's mainly paranoia, by the way, because that very label gay anarchist was given to me. I'm actually a social liberal, somewhere between socialist and liberal, vaguely. And even more paranoically, lol, I was testing was I being tested how I deal with my baggage from other more hegemonic groups, which until now I've been mainly a member of, and never felt I fitted in. So I believe this was not at all, by the way, actually the intention to be unparanoid and true. Though, of course, any one word is particularly open to a mismatch between the signifier, the word, and the signified, the meaning, which will, of course, be subjectively mediated by the receiver, me, of the signifier, that's socio's idea. So after my paranoid preamble, I'm going to concentrate on the more positive meanings of the word. But I'm going to deliberately undermine myself in the process, or semi-consciously. To sabotage, once it is divested of its hegemonic pejorative meanings of mindless disruption, that's a dictionary definition, is, or should say, can be a creative act full from my experience of it, aims to sabotage the workings of mainstream society and learning. Sabotage in the sense of, quote, hindering the cause of mainstream endeavour, that's again a dictionary definition, or again, deliberate subversion. Its etymological root is sabot, boot in French, en français, so it means to clatter in boots or sabot, literally all over everything. So it's got quite a pejorative literal meaning. Damage, destroy or disrupt, especially by secret means. Secret means. Okay, this word, infiltrators, that kind of thing. This word needs some anti-hegemonic reframing and reclaiming, but in a sense it reminds me of queer. Queer. It is a word so overladen with baggage and pejorative connotations. Is it really worth reclaiming? Again, as with queer, I like the idea of reclaiming the meaning of the word and the theoretical framework of queer theory built up around it, but I don't like the sound of the word, and for a man of my age its historical mainstream meanings and nasty connotations. So this is mainly head against heart stuff. How am I doing for time?
4:33.
Oh right, but I'm going to cut a bit out. I tried to be a bit more positive to summarise the next bit, that like being an enemy agent is quite good if you're going to disrupt the mainstream, and that's a positive use of sabotage, overturning the word. Then I thought, well, it's all very well being in a group which is sabotaging the mainstream in a good way, but if you're in the University of Liverpool Extension Studies Department or Philosophy in the Pubs and you're labelled as the gay anarchist and sabotaging things in a bad way, even though you're not, you're just being yourself, that's hard. Then I thought of Gary's concept of nomadic subjectivity, wandering from one setting to another but remaining yourself. And I thought that's quite helpful, though it's hard. Anyway, full is great for being yourself, so that's good. And finally I've got about, 1.5 minutes?
5:30, yeah.
Okay, the most, okay. The word, just to finish with a bit of philosophy, a subjective philosophical rhizome. The word sabotage epitomises to me the Derridian concept of an actual non-binary of a word signifier being played out as a seeming binary. In other words, the connotations, reference, multifacetedly extrapolated signifieds or meanings of the word sabotage can actually coexist, the good meanings and the bad meanings, in an in a counterpoint, group chord or discord or chromatic slippage. So that basically the word means different things to different people in different settings. Foulsric seems to have reclaimed the word, hence the words are slippery. T.S. Eliot. So it is an apposite word, finally, to reflect various key concepts of various continental theories, de- and re-territorialisation, as in, let's get rid of the negative meanings and reclaim them, re-territorialise them. The minor versus the major subject, these are Deleuzian concepts, so like, let's get the major, become a major subject, not just the minor victim. And Marxist use of subject as in subjected to. So I'm subjected to being given the word sabotage, but I'm attempting to reclaim it. Saussure, I've already said, and Derrida's deconstructionist ideas about non-binary, contrapuntal concepts, philosophical ideas, reference, and interpretations. But I wanted to finish with not an angry or a nasty, but kind of like sabotage, like whatever, lol. Because I'm not getting at anyone, but I don't like the word.
Okay, so it is the Free University of Liverpool. So it is Tim Jeeves, who has a letter that I have forgotten. T for touch, Tim for touch. 3, 2, 1.
Hello, Tim. We've known each other quite a long time, so I hope you won't be offended by my first question. Do you like to touch?
Do I like to touch? Yes, I do like to touch. I think there's a kind of maybe a cultural hesitation around it. That kind of thing of, accidentally. There was someone asleep on the train next to me the other day, and their knee was just sort of, things like that. And there was this sort of, it became very. I was very aware of it, and it was that sort of thing, okay, I'm going to move over a bit, and then they sort of moved over, and it was like, well, I can't go into the corner just because they're asleep. But it wasn't that it felt wrong, and that I didn't want it, but it was just taking a bit too much of my attention up. And I think that maybe there's a kind of a cultural thing there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think there is something about being English that's a little bit more hesitatory about touch. But I do like it. There's something nice about hugs, and being with friends is different. There is something I quite like about that. Yeah, there's an intensity.
And how would you describe the term touch in how you relate to the world?
Touch is a word that almost perfectly expresses an in-betweenness. Touch is about two things, and it is that point in which those two things meet. It's the boundary. Is when things touch. There's a quote I came across that was about touch is the gift in transit. To relate it back to sort of my interest in gifts, that there's that moment of transmission that's very interesting. And there's a marking that comes from touch as well. I was reading something the other day about comfort. It was by a writer called Sarah Ahmed, and she was talking about a comfortable chair, and the way that we describe a chair as comfortable. But of course a chair isn't comfortable by itself. It's comfortable because we touch it, because we experience it in a particular way. And she went on to talk about how when we sit in a comfortable chair, when we get out of it, we leave an impression, and it kind of moulds to us a little bit. And of course, you know, the next person that comes along, they can mould their chair to themselves as well. But there's something like that lasting, and then that changing it for the next person to come along. And yeah, and it just got me thinking about that potential that there is for things to hold their shape after they've been touched in a particular way, that then changes it for whoever might touch them afterwards.
And I've been struck recently when we've been talking on the telephone. You've often been talking about the stroking of your cat as a kind of reference point, and I'm just wondering what that evokes for you.
It's probably the way that I can communicate best with the cat. You know, we both, it feels very, you know, it doesn't feel like if I talk to him, you know, I'll obviously use a certain tone of voice because I think, you know, that he is aware of, you know, if I'm telling him not to scratch up the sofa, it's a different kind of voice from when I'm like, you know, oh, do you want some food or whatever. But that still feels very rooted in a human perspective of, you know, this is how, you know, I'm using a human tone of voice to try to convey that to him. Touch feels to me to be something that's not centred so much around the human, it's centred around perhaps an experience of us both being living creatures. But I sort of, you know, I enjoy touching him, and, you know, and I think that he gets a similar sort of feeling from being stroked, you know, that's to do with his hair being sort of, you know, his fur being groomed in a sort of way. And he'll do these sort of head rubs where he comes up and he sort of rubs his head against me. And that feels, you know, that's something that he does, that's a natural thing to him, and I think it's something to do with releasing hormones from his cheeks or something. So that's perhaps the reason why he does it, but it feels just friendly, and it just feels like a very sort of equal communication, if that makes sense, between us. And yeah, and sometimes, you know, I'll give him a little kiss and sort of hold him, and I feel like that feels very human to be kissing him, but I feel that he sort of, you know, like the face rub is a cat thing, there's a directness that almost translates to simplicity that I think he kind of gets in the same way as I get something from it, you know, that meeting again between the two of us.
And how do you, when someone says the words to you, don't touch, where does, I mean, I don't want to lead you anywhere, but what does that?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you said don't touch was a hot saucepan. Like perhaps, you know, like there's kind of the thing of, you know, being a child and being told not to. Yeah, there was also, I think, the other time that don't touch comes to mind is that those instances where you're perhaps walking through a shop and there's like glass stuff that could break. And there was always that kind of fear in me of like, how much money would it cost if I sort of tripped and knocked all this stuff over. So I guess those two instances suggest to me a kind of a trust that there's a hazard to touching. You know, there's the potential for pain. You know, the emotional sort of relation between touch and the mind. That's quite an interesting one, you know, the way that something is disgusting, you know, because it's slimy or, you know, those kind of things. That feels very subjective and sort of, you know, rooted in just, you know, that's the mind, or something that feels nice. Something about pain feels like it's more instinctive and bypasses, you know, touching something hot, and, you know, I know that there's instances of people that don't necessarily have the nerves in the same way, so that they feel pain in that same way, but there's something that kind of bypasses that, whereas it seems to me that a lot of the emotions we attach to touch are much more learnt, which is quite interesting.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you very much, Ben.